Okay, let's talk about July 2026. Because honestly, this single month has delivered some incredibly explosive AI releases that are literally redrawing the global technology map. We're looking at a massive, historic shift in the AI arms race right now, with multi-trillion parameter models dropping left and right. If you want to understand where the absolute frontier of AI is today, and maybe more importantly, who controls it, well, you are in the exact right place for this explainer. So, here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with Chapter 1, the open weight threat, move into Chapter 2, the Western flagship, and wrap up with Chapter 3, the final verdict and the bigger picture.
All right, let's dive right into Chapter 1, the open weight threat.
To really grasp the shockwave that just hit Silicon Valley, you have to look at the sheer scale of these two challengers. Within just 3 days of each other, two absolute behemoths dropped. On July 16th, Moonshot released Kimi K3, boasting a staggering 2.8 trillion parameters. It seems like trillion is definitely the new billion in AI, right? And then, just 3 days later, Alibaba unveiled Qwen 3.8 Max, a 2.4 trillion parameter multimodal giant. Basically, Chinese labs are now shipping frontier-class models at a massive scale that used to be strictly reserved for the biggest US tech giants. And the kicker? They're promising to release the open weights for developers worldwide.
But the real disruption here? It's the economics. Kimi K3 is offering near-frontier quality for just $3 per million input tokens. To put that into perspective, that is roughly 3 to 5 times cheaper than the flagship models from Western labs. They are delivering incredibly high-level intelligence at a fraction of the established market cost. It's a total game changer that is completely upending the industry's pricing models. And Kimi didn't just launch with cheap pricing. It launched with undeniable, hard-hitting performance. Based on nearly 500,000 blind human votes on the Arena front-end code leaderboard, Kimi K3 secured the #1 spot. With a score of 1679, it cleanly beat out Western heavyweights like Anthropic's Claude 5 Fable and OpenAI's GPT 5.6 Soul. Oh, and it also scored a 57 on the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index. That actually makes it the highest-ranking open-weight model ever recorded. So yeah, this is a verified powerhouse. Now, we do have to contrast Kimi's proven data with Alibaba's Qwen 3.8 Max. At a Shanghai conference, Alibaba proudly claimed the Qwen 3.8 is second only to Fable 5. But, as you can see from this quote from the Next Web, the industry is facing this claim with some deep skepticism. Why? Well, because Alibaba hasn't released a single benchmark table, no model card, and no standard per-token API pricing. Right now, it's just a preview running on a credit-based subscription system. So while Kimi actually has the data to back up the hype, Qwen is leaning heavily on a just trust us marketing approach. Which brings us to Chapter 2, the Western flagship. So just days after those Chinese models grabbed all the headlines, Anthropic released Claude Opus 5 on July 24th, and they brought a completely different strategy to the table. Opus 5 is fascinating. Anthropic describes it as thoughtful and proactive. It's really not just a reactive chatbot, it's designed to be a diligent agent. It's packing a 1 million token context window and features what they call always-on thinking, meaning it actively iterates on its own work in the background. What's super interesting is that Anthropic's engineers specifically advised that you need to interact with it differently. You actually have to give it judgment rather than strict over-constrained rules. If you pile on a bunch of contradictory instructions, it stalls out. But if you clear out the stale rules and just give it a clear goal, it works highly autonomously to solve complex problems. When independent testers finally wet their hands on Opus 5, the results were incredibly polarized. On complex math, it achieves a perfect score, literally hitting exact answers where almost all other models fail. For agentic workflows, it can autonomously build a dataset, fine-tune a local model, and generate a working web UI entirely from scratch. But here's the catch. Testers found it actually regressed in 3D and visual generation polish compared to older models like Opus 4.8. So it's definitely not a jack of all trades. It is a highly specialized workhorse that's tuned intensely for logic. And here's the strategic counterpunch from the West. Opus 5 delivers this near-frontier intelligence at a mid-tier price of just $5 per million input tokens. That's half the cost of their top-tier Fable 5 model, yet it matches or even beats it in specific reasoning benchmarks. Anthropic is aggressively driving highly capable agentic AI down the cost curve, really trying to make Opus 5 the default model for everyday, high-volume, multi-step work. Let's wrap it all up with Chapter 3, the final verdict and the bigger picture. Okay, So we've got incredibly cheap Chinese models and an aggressively priced Western flagship. If you are building right now, here is your clear, actionable buyer's guide. You should absolutely use Kirami 3 for cheap, high-volume front-end coding. If you need native multimodal understanding, Qwen 3.8 Max is your target, assuming you're willing to take a leap of faith on its unverified claims. And if you're building deep, autonomous reasoning pipelines, Claude Opus 5 is for sure the premier choice.
But we really can't end this explainer without zooming out to the macro level, because the geopolitical stakes here are just staggering. NYU professor Spot Galloway recently outlined a pretty severe economic security warning. With Chinese labs now successfully shipping frontier open-weight models, there's a very real threat of dumping, essentially flooding the U.S. market with incredibly cheap, highly capable AI models. The huge risk here is that this collapses the premium pricing that currently props up America's trillion-dollar AI industry. With roughly 40% of the S&P 500 tied up in the AI valuation bet, a massive market shift through cheaper Chinese models could literally drag the broader U.S. market down with it.
Now, you might expect American tech giants to be rushing to Washington demanding protectionism against this threat, right? Actually, we're seeing the exact opposite. Companies like NVIDIA and Meta are heavily lobbying Washington against restricting American open-source AI. As this coalition letter, spearheaded by NVIDIA, points out, they argue that open models are absolutely essential to U.S. competitiveness. NVIDIA's Jensen Huang is warning policymakers that premature restrictions won't stop China, they'll just drive innovation overseas. And, of course, we have to note that NVIDIA benefits immensely when thousands of developers are buying GPUs to run open models, rather than relying on a few massive closed labs.
Tracking this political shift reveals a rapidly, and I mean rapidly changing landscape. In early July, Anthropic was very vocal, urging action against Chinese models that were essentially distilling or copying Western AI. But then, on July 24th, that heavyweight coalition led by NVIDIA and Meta launched their pro-open weights letter. And here's where it gets crazy. What truly shocked the industry was that later that exact same day, OpenAI suddenly flipped its stance and added its signature to the open weights letter too. This dramatic pivot left Anthropic completely isolated, as the lone major U.S. lab advocating for government restrictions.
So, we've seen the specs, we've seen the collapsing prices, and we've watched the intense corporate lobbying unfold. I want to leave you with this provocative question to ponder. Is cheap, open, largely Chinese AI a massive advantage for American developers to embrace so they can build faster and cheaper? Or is it an economic weapon aimed squarely at collapsing America's most valuable industry? The July 2026 AI wars have officially set the stage, and how we answer this question will likely define the global economy for the next decade. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.